So I decided to go see Martin Scorsese's Silence, and
Santana, acabe com ela. Ai!
I thought it was good. This is my first of Martin Scorsese's films, and I have to say that I was rather impressed. However, I do have my fair share of issues with it. But as always, let's first discuss the plot. So the plot revolves around two Jesuit priests that travel in search of their mentor and to help those that practice the outlawed faith of Christianity in Japan. And from a fairly general synopsis such as this one, you probably wouldn't think there's a whole lot to see in this movie. But as shown us from the nearly 3-hour runtime, that is far from the case. This is kind of a slow burn film that I find comparable to that of something like There Will Be Blood, where a significant portion of the film is you slowly building up to what ultimately becomes an integral scene to the film. And I believe it is fair to say that this film did this very well. The film plants the seeds of doubt, superstition, and other emotions that always had me second guessing myself. The outcome might feel predictable, but I feel as if a viewer's prediction is ultimately chosen by their personality and morality, which certainly gives a sense of uniqueness to the film, as most people will probably have different interpretations of the film than others. However, I wish this feeling was more consistent. There are a pretty good amount of times where the film explicitly tells you what to feel or show what the outcome actually was, where I feel like it could have been much more effective to allow the audience to interpret for themselves. It already feels as if the film is allowing you to place yourself in the protagonist's shoes, but then ends up cutting itself short of the experience in certain spots of the film. Another thing I found myself disliking was how long some of the scenes were. As I mentioned before, this is certainly a slow burn kind of film. However, the film has a bad habit of lingering on something for far too long. So long to the point that it'll take my focus off of the film. And this again happens with some frequency. For example, the film will take its time to show a line of Christians being killed one at a time in the same fashion. I understand what they were going for, as each death probably was meant to feel like a weight on the protagonist's shoulders, but I feel like it was executed rather poorly. Speaking of things that are executed poorly, there is another scene in the film that was actually pretty infuriating. I won't spoil it for anyone that wants to see it, but I'll just say that any form of interpretation is absolutely thrown away, and the film does one of the absolute worst things it could have done. Or at least this is how I feel. But ultimately, it didn't hurt the experience that much, as it wasn't something that was really built upon. And one last point about the plot, I feel as if there's a certain point where the film should have just ended, as it kind of feels like it just drags on with weightless scenes that ultimately build up to a rather lackluster conclusion. Not so much so because the scene itself is lackluster, but more so because it rids itself of the mystery left behind by the deciding moment the film had been building up to. I feel as if it would have been much more effective to have the audience in a stir about what it all meant and what the fate of the characters actually were, but instead we got our questions answered in a rather predictable way. Not to discuss the shots of the film, they were absolutely fantastic. This movie is quite the treat to look at. Nearly every shot took advantage of the amazing scenery while simultaneously using each shot to help build the emotion of the scene. If there's anything I have to pick at here, it's that I believe that they could have used better perspectives for certain scenes instead of the ones that they used in the film. Nothing major, but I feel like it could have made the scenes much more effective. Much like No Country for Old Men, this film lacks a score, which is a pretty ballsy move that I ultimately feel worked for the film. The only time you hear music in the movie is when it's that of the world, which gives it much more of a presence because of how scarce it is. In the end, I found myself liking Silence, but I don't think I can bring myself to call it the masterpiece others find it to be. Even so, there's no denying the fantastic and memorable moments the film presents. I just wish that it would have had a more consistent feel to it, and not for it to elongate where it doesn't need to be. Silence is a memorable story of struggle and death, but falters every so often, so for that, I'm giving it a 7 out of 10. Even though I pretty heavily criticized the film, I find it to be a film worth recommending. There are a lot of powerful scenes that are so masterfully made that they are worth the price of admission alone. But those are just my thoughts. Let me know what you all thought about Silence down in the comment section below, and I'll see you all later.